The theme today is very much about the gut and how the gut is the cornerstone of good immunity. And it's more and more we're hearing about that now. There's a lot of research being done on gut-brain axis and the connection between gut and food and mood. And it's not actually a new concept at all. It's been as old as the hills. It's around since Ayurvedic times, several thousand years ago. The Greeks, the Romans, they all knew that the seed of what tends to go right or go wrong all gets planted in the gut. And the logic of that is fairly simple when you know some of the basics behind it. So I won't go into too much detail, but just to give you a little bit of the basics behind it. If you think of it, when an embryo is forming, it's like a little fern as their nervous system develops. So one end of the fern uncoils up into the central nervous system and the brain and the spinal cord, but the other end unfurls down into the enteric nervous system. That's the nervous system of the gut. So when we call the gut the second brain, it's not even really the second brain, but it's one and the same. They're the same material, they're producing the same chemicals, the same neurotransmitters. They both have neurons. There are more neurons in the gut than in the spinal cord. And so a lot of the things that will affect the gut will affect the whole body. It'll affect the brain, it'll affect your mood, it'll affect your energy levels, it'll affect your ability to be immune sensitive. So in other words, if you get something, can your body fight it off well? And immune intelligence as well, that your body can tell the difference between what things does it need to fight and what things are harmless. And it's usually, if the gut has gone awry, you'll start to see other things go awry too. The sleep pattern might go crazy. Someone's weight might have a few issues, either too high or too low. It's very hard to stabilize it. They might even have things like heart palpitations. They might have nervous tremors. They might have skin breakouts. They might have allergic reactions to things. There'd be any number of things that will happen. And it's so rare that all of those things will get traced back to the gut. Because if you think about it, if someone has neurological symptoms and maybe they've got chronic migraine, maybe they've got some mood disorder, maybe they have early onset Alzheimer's, or maybe they have Parkinson's, anything like that, the likelihood of them going to a neurologist and the neurologist asking about their gut, it's very, very unlikely, because that's not where they specialize. That's not their field. So it's sometimes up to us ourselves to go back and say, well, I'm the only one who lives in this body. I'm the only one who thinks inside this head. So what's going on in here? What's gone wrong? Why has it gone wrong? And how can I fix it? And the simplest route back to fixing it is almost always look at what's going on in the gut. Is there dysbiosis? So that's bad digestion. Because we're meant to have trillions of bacteria. And unfortunately, the word bacteria got such bad press over the years of all these adverts for detergents that could kill 99.9% of bacteria, until they realized we wouldn't be here except for bacteria. We live with them. We need them. They're actually really, really beneficial. And the vast majority of the bacteria that you have in your gut are really beneficial, or should be. There's a handful that are just passengers. They don't do anything good or bad. And then there's a few more that can be troublesome. And all we need to do really is, it's like a seesaw. We just need to keep it somewhere in the middle. It's called homeostasis. So the body likes to be in balance. The body likes to be just somewhere in that sweet spot in the middle, where it's got a good, healthy population of good bacteria, a manageable amount of the ones that don't do good or bad, and a very under control amount of the bad ones. You can't fully eliminate the bad ones. They'll always be there, but you want to keep that population under control. So in order to do that, what we need to do, obviously, when we think of the gut, we think of what we're eating, but it's not just about what we're eating. It's how are you getting sleep? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting sound quality of sleep? Are you getting sleep at the right time? So sometimes people who find they've gotten into a cycle of poor sleep might be very, very broken, disrupted sleep during the night. So then they'll nap during the day. Then they might wake up for a while, do a few little jobs or watch some telly and then nap again. And it's very choppy and changey. So their body clock is very dysregulated. It doesn't really know, are we awake? Are we asleep? Should we be releasing these hormones or these hormones? Because the body is geared to respond to daylight, respond to night, and produce different things accordingly. So if you're a shift worker, if you're someone who naps a lot during the day, if you're someone who's always got a screen on in the bedroom and you're just checking your social media, or you're just watching that last half hour of Netflix when you should have been asleep hours ago, your brain gets very confused about what's going on. And the brain and the gut are constantly in dialogue with each other, even more so from the gut to the brain. So if there's messages saying, wake up, we're watching something really interesting, but the body is saying, but we're due to be asleep. That's when I do all my repair. That's when I release all the good hormones. That's when, if there's any cells that need to be patched up, I can get those fixed while you're asleep. It can't do those things. So then you head into the next day with a deficit, that you're just not firing on all cylinders. Maybe you're not digesting things as well. Maybe you're a bit irritable. Maybe your energy levels are poor. Maybe you're just finding you're not able to cope as well with day-to-day things that you should be able to. Should, I use the word should advisedly. So sleep is definitely one big aspect of it. Stress is another aspect of it. And stress is such a huge umbrella. We could spend an hour just talking about stress alone. But we need a certain amount of stress. There's good stress that motivates us. But drift feeding, chronic, insidious stress is not what we're designed for at all. The body doesn't do well with that. It's designed for, if necessary, a short, sharp burst of stress. It'll release hormones accordingly to deal with it. It'll release adrenaline. It'll release cortisol. They're the fight or flight, get in action, respond, do something dramatic to get out of a tricky situation. And then those levels drop again and we can breathe again. And then we get to go back to normal. If we have regulated amounts of stress, if we've got chronic insidious stress, we have this drip feed of cortisol all the time and adrenaline all the time and norepinephrine all the time. What's the problem? The problem is they're all really dysregulating for the gut. So again, you have the same neurotransmitters in the gut and in the brain. And if there's too many of those things being produced in the gut, it can't absorb nutrients very well. It can't break down foods very well. So we don't get the full benefit out of the good foods that we do eat. Peristalsis gets sluggish. So that's the process of breaking down food and getting it through the gut efficiently. So you can get quite a bit of fermentation going on. You can get a little bit of putrefaction where things are just, they're fermenting rather than digesting. And you get a lot of endotoxins. So they're the nasty byproducts of fermentation rather than the good elements that we should get with good digestion. So stress is a big no-no in that sense. It's not just about, oh, this generic stress is bad for you. It has a very measurable bad effect on how the gut performs and how it does what it needs to do. So sleep, stress, diet, understandably enough, will have a huge effect. But if your sleep and your stress aren't great, you could have the best diet in the world and your body can't use it very well because it's not producing the right chemicals to break it down properly. Other factors that can come into it as well is things like immunity. If you think about it, the lining of the gut is meters and meters and meters long. So it's got lots and lots of folds and bends and layers, but the actual wall of the gut is about as thick as an A4 page. So literally an A4 page that you'd have in your foolscap. That's about the thickness of the gut wall. And the reason that it's so incredibly thin is it needs to be partially porous. It needs to be partially absorbing nutrients in through the wall of the gut and letting certain things back out through the wall of the gut. So if it's too thick, it can't do that. But the problem with that can be if we're eating the wrong things or things that for some reason we've developed a reaction to, we can't tolerate them very well anymore. They shouldn't be able to get through that gut wall. If the gut wall has become compromised and become a little bit leaky, bigger particles can get through there. And those bigger particles should not be in our bloodstream. So if we're getting proteins and things that shouldn't be in the bloodstream into the bloodstream, that sends alarm bells to the immune system because the immune system says we have invaders. These shouldn't be in here. We should be getting very tiny molecules of food that's been well digested and well assimilated. We should not be getting big chunks of proteins. And proteins are the piece of food that causes allergies. So that's why a lot of the time you'll find people who get allergic reactions or intolerances, it's to things like grains, the protein in grains. It's to things like dairy. It's to things like corn. Even for some people, things like meat can be a problem as well. But as soon as you sort out the health of the gut wall, a lot of those problems can be rectified because suddenly you've made those junctions that are meant to be tight, you've sealed them up again. So you can do that by eating the right kinds of foods, eliminating foods that don't agree with you. Eating when you're not stressed is a huge one. So I'll often say to people, if you're finding that you're very, very stressed or you're very, very head up, but it's nearly lunchtime and you feel you have to eat, don't. Hold off if needs be. It's actually more important to eat when your body is ready to absorb food than to just eat because the clock says it's 1 o'clock, I have to have my lunch. So if you're tempted to eat because you feel you should, or you feel, oh, I didn't have anything for a few hours, wait. If necessary, have something tiny like a bone broth or something small like that. Get yourself back in action. Do a few breathing exercises, roll the shoulders, take a few belly breaths, and that helps to massage the gut as well. It helps to relax it and encourages normal peristalsis. And then have something small, but chew it really, really well. Because by chewing, you're releasing enzymes for one thing, but you're also breaking down all those very big bulky parts that can be much harder. You have no teeth in your gut. Your gut can't do any chewing. So it's relying on us to do the chewing part up here. And the process of chewing is what tells the brain there's food on the way. Start releasing hydrochloric acid, start releasing digestive enzymes, and get ready to break down the food. So you need to do it in very relaxed stages. If you're getting yourself in a knot before you're due to eat, your body won't digest things well at that stage. The other thing I would say, because people ask me about it a lot when they say healthy diet, what constitutes a healthy diet? If we were to ask every single person here, what's your definition of a healthy diet? Everyone probably has a slightly different version of what a healthy diet is, and that's okay. That's how it should be, because we get notions sometimes when you hear there's a health book out, or I heard this thing on YouTube, or so-and-so mentioned they tried this particular thing and it worked a treat for them. And it might have, but it might not work for you. Because a lot of the time I'll find people say to me, raw foods, that's where it's at, and lots of salads and lots of smoothies. And if you think of it, especially at the moment, it's freezing cold out. There's a dampness in the air. And at the best of times in Ireland, it's never roasting hot. It's never bone dry. So we're not really designed for freezing cold raw foods. And freezing cold raw foods are way too much work for the digestive system at the best of times, because in order to digest food properly, it has to be at least at body temperature, ideally it's a bit warmer, and broken down very, very well. And raw foods are the least broken down. They're still very intact, and they're still very, very strong cell walls on the structure. So on vegetables and that, which is fine if you've got a very robust constitution and you're very strong and your digestive fire is very, very strong, you'll still manage to break it down. If on the other hand, you're trying to be very, very cold, if you're a bit weak, if you get tired very easily, fatigue very easily, if your energy levels are generally a bit low, you find your cognition isn't great, your brain is a bit foggy, the last thing you need is to throw a bucket of ice water at your body, which is kind of what very, very cold food is doing to your body. You want to work with it. You want to support it, give it warm things, give it things that are already a little bit broken down, so cooked to some degree, because that takes some of the work out of it. It's kind of pre-digested it effectively. You might want to try fermented foods, so things like sauerkraut or kimchi or kefir, even yogurt. Other people don't do well on those at all. Other people find they don't tolerate histamines very well, and those kind of foods are very high in histamines, and it causes more of an allergic reaction than anything in them. There are those who will say they swear by raw foods. They may have had a cooked diet for a long, long time, and then once they converted to raw foods, they found their energy levels really went through the roof, and they're way more productive. They have way more clarity in their heads. So you need to suck it and see. You need to test for yourself. If you've consistently found that there's days you'll have your smoothie and you'll have your salad, and by half two you're miserable because your energy levels are drained, you're feeling shivery, you're feeling deficient, because that's kind of what it amounts to, then you might want to switch. You might want to go to a warmer breakfast. Maybe try something like a porridge with your seeds sprinkled in, well-soaked seeds sprinkled in, maybe some blueberries, those types of things. And maybe try some warming spices, things like cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, ginger, all those very warming things really support the digestive system very, very well. Warms up the stomach, but also helps the digestive tract. So I'd always encourage, if you're feeling a little bit deficient, add in those warm spices, not spicy. They don't have to be hot, just aromatic warming spices. The other thing I would say is when you are using any foods that are so-called whole foods or health foods, there's quite a bit more fiber in whole foods and health foods because they haven't been processed as much. So always make sure you soak them really, really, really well. Maybe the night before, if you're talking about bigger things like bigger beans or bigger nuts. Smaller seeds might need to be soaked for as long, smaller lentils and things might need to be soaked for as long, but I would still soak them and cook them really, really well if you can. It makes a huge difference to how well you digest them. The other thing you might want to try putting with them is fat. So a lot of the time we have a fear of fat, that all fat is bad news. Fat doesn't make you fat. Carbohydrates tend to make us fat. So that's breads and potatoes and those types of things tend to make us fat. Fats, good fats, so coconut oil or flax oil or linseed as it's known, pumpkin seeds, Brazil nuts, olive oil, all of those guys, oily fish, they tend to be really, really nourishing and they're fabulous. They're amazing brain foods. So they're also really, really good for your gut. Really good anti-inflammatory foods. So if you're prone to any kind of inflammation in the body, sore joints, skin breakouts, migraines, because if you think about it, inflammation doesn't have to just mean big red swollen joints. Inflammation can be anything that's a little bit on fire in the body. So that could be asthma flaring up, that could be mood disorders, because usually if there's a mood disorder going on, it's because there's some imbalance going on in the brain and the chemistry is off. So if there is too much pro-inflammatory action going on, too much white blood cells in the brain, they shouldn't be in there. They're fighting with what's meant to be healthy brain tissue. And if that's the case, you might find your fatigue levels are really, really off the charts, or you might find your mood is not great. Your ability to get to sleep isn't great, or to stay asleep isn't great. Your focus might not be great, or concentration or ability to remember things off the top of your head might be a little bit, I know that name, I know that number, but I can't think of it. When things are just always out of reach, you want to make sure you're getting in plenty of those anti-inflammatory, really good essential fats. And the reason they're called essential fats is the body doesn't manufacture them. We have to eat them. They're essential in the diet. So lots of other things, the body will find a way around it. If we don't eat it, it kind of struggle on and figure out a way to make it. It can't make essential fats unless we eat them. So whether you get them from plant source or animal source, just make sure you're having, a decent supply of them. You don't have to have crazy amounts of them. They're very, very concentrated foods. But each day, if you're having your breakfast, can you put a spoon of a coconut oil in there? Can you put a spoon of flax oil in there? Or a sprinkle of seeds over if you're having a sandwich and a bowl of soup at lunchtime. Or can you use clarified butter instead of using regular butter? Clarified butter is such a good one because it helps to release butyric acid in the tummy. And that's another of those foods that you can't really manufacture too easily yourself, but it's a byproduct of good foods like clarified butter. And who uses it? The good bacteria in the gut. So it's not all about what we're feeding ourselves, it's what we're feeding the good bacteria, because they in turn look after us. So they need things like caprylic acid from coconut oil, they need butyric acid from clarified butter. They don't need trans fats from ready meals and processed foods or biscuits and those types of things. They don't need artificial sweeteners, they don't need additives, and they don't need food colorings. So if you're really trying to trim it right down to the basics, to say, well, what is the perfect diet? Just make it very simple on yourself. Start with what wouldn't it include? And it wouldn't include stuff that comes from a chemistry set. So start with things that grow, things that are living at some point in their life. They may have been dried or they may have been chopped up to some degree, but did they start as a plant, or did they start as an animal, or did they start as a living thing? That's probably a good place to start, rather than overcomplicating it. Well, should I have this, or is that bad? Is this good? Am I allowed that? Am I allowed the other? Start with the living foods and see how you get on after that.